Welcome to the Backyard Professor Response videos. Happy Easter. I have been reading about the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, the reason that we have Easter. I have also been reading a book that I have not read, but I have read her other book on the star people, the sky people, Artie Sixkiller Clark, Space Age Indians, and I found a potential Easter message in light of Paul's teaching in the New Testament in 1 Corinthians on the resurrection. And I thought, today being Easter, this could be a very interesting discussion. I mean, if the title of this particular video doesn't get 10,000 views, I'm going to feel gypped. What a combination, right? Now, understand the t-shirt of the day. In my defense, I was left unsupervised. There you have it, right? So I'm wearing my ugly sweater today, and I probably shouldn't, but it's the warmest thing I've got. This is a 2019 book. I do believe it's either her third or fourth book. And her other books I have reviewed in previous videos, and they are a delight to read. She is an Amerindian. That's what she calls the folks. So I guess I'm okay. I'm not trying to be racist. I hope I don't get any racial comments. That's not what it's about. She's a lovely Native American Indian lady who is an author, an exquisite author, and a fabulous UFO researcher, where she goes directly to the people to get her information. I like it very much. Now, the other interesting thing, oh, by the way, there's my backyard. That's another part of my backyard. Share that view with you. I'm out in the yard. It's windy. I hope that wind doesn't goof up the microphone. If it does, I'm going to be very upset. Maybe I should turn, I'll take a chance. So Space Age Indians, what she does, there were a group of Native American Indians who were put together during the Vietnam War over there, and they were fighting the Viet Cong, the VC, as they called them. And every one of them had experience with alien beings. And every one of them saw the same kind of alien beings, both as a group and in individual encounters. As the war progressed, they were saved and helped by the blue beings, the beings that they called the star people. And this is so fascinating to me. This is incredible. I want to read just a couple of excerpts and then tie in what came to my mind as I was reading this one particular account of Ute, UTE. His account was extremely interesting. All of them are extremely interesting. But this is Matthias's story. In Matthias's story, for those of you who get this book, and you should get this book and read it, page 17, he says, I don't think the blue men are physical beings like humans. They are glowing, and this is a typical description from pretty much everybody who sees the blue beings. They are a glowing, shimmering blue light type of person that appears as human forms. I can't describe their faces because the shimmering blue light conceals their faces. I think they're made up of energy. Perhaps in their world they take a physical form, but on Earth they are pure energy. But I believe they don't like war. They are peaceful beings, and in their presence I felt peace and love. I think they chose me to save. There were other Marines that died that might, but they saved me that night, but they saved me instead. Why do you think they chose you? He says, they said they knew me. I believe they knew I was with my friends that night that they encountered the Viet Cong, and they were looking out for us. Now that's interesting. He contends that the blue beings knew him, and that is one of the reasons why they helped him out. Very remarkable. And that's just part of Matthias's story. In Wilson's story, he says, when we talked about it, the general consensus was that the event was a part of our legacy as Indians, a certain event that happened to them in the war. The Star people had always interacted with our people. Our ancestors knew them. Our grandfathers knew them. They were just looking out for us because we were Indians. They were our ancient kin, a part of our DNA. And for the longest time, this gentleman could not accept that, but now he does. Now, that is an absolutely shocking thing for him to say. And this is one reason why they don't just share their stories indiscriminately. These men are old now. They're getting ready to die. One of the interviewees that she interviewed died in the process of her publishing this book. The others are very old. They're veterans. They're not being well taken care of. They're sick. It's a shame how this country treats its own veterans. It needs to be changed, and nobody's doing anything about it. It's a horror, but anyway, further on in Wilson's story, he says, they told him to stay away from a certain place because it was dangerous. And she asks why. And he responds, well, they never told me, but they told me on that night in Vietnam, they saved us because we were not the aggressor. When I explained that I had many questions, I wanted to know what happened to the Viet Cong bodies. There was an instance where the Viet Cong had overwhelmed them and was shelling them with mortars. And some of the blue beings actually stood in front of the people, the men, to protect them from the shrapnel and the explosion and save their lives. And he was wondering why where they took the bodies, and they were told they were safe on another world where there was no war. Do you believe them? Yes. They told me they would take me there if I wanted to go, but I told them I could not leave my buddies here. They said they could not wait and that I must leave this area. That was the end of our conversation. So he left the area because he was in such great danger. That's utterly fascinating. Now, this is the part that just absolutely overwhelms us. At least it did me. This is Oot's story. And he was the little guy. I understand how you must feel, I said. I had a brother and uncle in Vietnam, but I heard that you have a story about the blue men. Can you tell me about it? He nodded and took another drink. Our plan was to invade a territory called Parrot's Peak. I don't know why it was called that. I never saw a parrot that day. The VC took us on in full battle. Soldiers were falling all around me. It was probably an hour into the battle before I suddenly realized that I was separated from my squad. I was alone. What do you mean you were alone? I asked. None of the men who entered into the invasion with me were standing. They were all dead, dying, or in retreat. I remember finding a large tree. I sat down, my back leaning against it, and I cried. I knew that my dream of never returning to Colorado had come true. I was going to die. There was no escape. He had had a dream he would never return home. But that belief must have changed. You're here. What happened? Well, I remember standing and throwing my weapon away. I had killed my last man. If I was going to die, I decided that I wasn't going to be the aggressor. I was going to die without a weapon. But you lived. How did you manage to get out of Parrot's Beak? I asked. It was the blue men that saved me. How? I fell to the ground in prayer. I asked Jesus to look upon me favorably. I asked him to forgive me for my sins and especially for killing the VC. I prayed, a light engulfed me, and the next thing I knew, I was floating upward through the sky. Were you aware that you were being taken away from the battle? No. When the light fell upon me, I thought God had come for me and I was dead. I didn't understand that I had been taken by the blue men. Well, when did you realize that? Well, I woke up in a clean, cool room. There were blue lights, a hazy mist, and I was no longer dirty, hot, and sweaty. My combat fatigues were clean. I felt fresh and energized. I sat up from a metal table in the room, but I was still disoriented. I had no idea where I was or how I got there. I walked around the room and I decided I was in heaven, maybe in a holding room, and God was going to judge my fate. Well, when did you realize that it was not God but the blue men? I asked. I'm not sure how long I was in that room. I think time must be different in space. It could have been 5 minutes, it could have been 5 hours, for all I know. But as time passed, a tall blue spirit man entered. I say he was a blue man, but it was hard to make out his characteristics. He appeared luminous but blue. His whole body shimmered. Again, the shimmering of the blue men. Later, he explained to me, here's the part that reminded me of St. Paul in 1 Corinthians, I believe it's chapter 15. Later, he explained to me that their bodies in their natural form were not solid, but that they were beings of light. He said they could move back and forth between light and solid material, but it was tedious, and for the most part, they did not take a solid form because people were more alarmed by a solid blue man. Did they tell you why they had taken you? To save me. They had been observing the battle and saw me prostrate on the ground praying and decided I was worth saving. I'm still waiting to find out what made me worthy when dozens of others died. So what St. Paul said in 1 Corinthians 15 that has to do with the Easter message, one of the interpretations of the resurrection of Jesus Christ is that we will be resurrected in our physical bodies just like we have now, only in a perfected state. No disease, no pain, no battle scars, whatever. My ears won't be as goofy as they are. My eyesight will be perfect, etc. This idea, how Paul expresses it, is we were born physical bodies, and in the resurrection, being changed in the twinkling of an eye, we will be raised spiritual bodies. The one possible interpretation of this is that the spiritual has to do not so much with the physical, but with something more ethereal, perhaps, wispy, shimmering, like they have described these blue beings of pure energy. And so I thought, well, now that's an interesting tie-in, because one interpretation is Jesus is raising from the dead, and then in Acts, they're there at the day of Pentecost. Jesus comes by, and then he ascends to heaven, and everyone's weeping and wailing. And Peter says, why are you weeping and wailing? He said he would return in the same body in which he ascended. So the interpretation of that is that it's going to be a physical body resurrection. St. Paul in 1 Corinthians 15 perhaps has a different interpretation. Some churches will interpret it as not a physical resurrection, but as a spiritual resurrection. And that reminded me of this guy thinking, well, these guys aren't physical beings, they are spirit beings, they are energy. And we get it, energy is material, but back then, who could explain that, right? In Paul's day, they had to describe it as spiritual, not energy or energetic. So I thought that was worth at least mentioning, at least talking about, since we are in the Easter day today and we're in the Easter season, it's been Holy Week all week. Good Friday has come and gone. Now we're here on Easter Sunday again. So that is very interesting. Now, she says later, while you were on board their spacecraft, did you learn anything? Well, I learned that their civilization is more than 1,000,000 years older than ours. Wow. Once they lived in a solid material form, but over time, they learned how to turn their bodies into energy without destroying their soul. Soul? What does that mean? I asked. Well, now, I am putting my own assumptions onto them. I guess it was their soul. They were able to function as beings anyway, but maybe it was not their soul. Anyway, being able to become light beings allowed them to ease the population problem until they could find other worlds where their people could spread out and live. Are you saying they told you that their planet was overpopulated? Yes. So once they found a way of turning them into light energy, their scientists and leaders and people of knowledge became light entities. Now, that is staggering. That is amazing, because 1 John, I do believe, in the New Testament said it's one of the shortest verses in the entire Bible. It says, God is light. And there seems to be another one there. I believe it is in John also, either 1st or 2nd John, where it says God is love, etc. And that is how some of these beings are described. Energy, light, love. There's peace that comes across people when they interact with these blue men, these star people, as the Hopis call them, as well as the Navajo. They are the Kachinas that they talk about in their religious ceremonies. So across time and with the different cultural ideas and interpretations, whether they're the ancient early Christians, the ancient Hebrews, the early Greeks, later Christianity, the American Indians, etc., there appears to always have been angels interacting. And what could they call them back then except angels? They weren't human. They were in human form. But even Paul himself said, be careful how you act with people, lest you be entertaining angels unaware. See? And we have seen podcasts just within this last month on YouTube. Jesse Michaels, was it him and Danny Sheehan, or was it Danny Jones? Anyway, one of the podcasters had a guest on. I can't remember if it was Danny Sheehan or someone else, that described how, no, I think it was Danny Sheehan, how there are aliens among us, different hybrids. Area 52 just had a new video out just yesterday, I believe. Yesterday or the day before, brand new one, on this idea of hybrids living among us that look very human, but they are the aliens or the angels. Don't get hung up on what they're called. It just appears to me that throughout the concourses of history, going pretty far back, there's a figure in the Old Testament called the angel of the Lord. And as you read several of those Old Testament stories, some of the miracles, some of the power that this angel of the Lord has, he actually helped come and destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, raining fire from heaven. I mean, it sounds fantastical, impossible, ridiculous to our setup, to our understanding and our culture, because we are so far removed from it. But there has been stories through the eons and the centuries of outside helping beings coming and helping certain groups of people, certain individuals, etc., when they're in dire trouble. These guys, some of them were told that this civilization of the blue beings, who happen to dislike war but are willing to save those who don't go to war, apparently they're peaceful, but they are helpful. But they've been around for 1,000,000 times longer than our civilization. That's a long time. Who's to say that maybe some of that talk about the ancient interactions with other beings, that there's no way to describe what they do with their higher technological advanced capabilities than calling it magic. Others call it the power of God. Don't get so hung up on what they call it as understanding that it might not be so far-fetched that this is still happening today if they've been here for that long. And they have that capability of being able to become light beings, and they can travel through the vastness of space or live under our very oceans, etc. It's just a remarkable reminder from my take that the Easter story is entirely bizarre. But that doesn't have anything to do with it being true or false. Bizarre is not the basis of truth. Truth is the basis of truth. What is real? And we can, but we probably shouldn't, I should say, using our very limited understanding and our limited experience here on Earth, our limited knowledge, that can't possibly be the basis of what is real, and only our experience is what is allowed and nothing else, otherwise it's false. That is to entirely be too myopic, and really it kind of takes a special sort of arrogance, perhaps maybe why the scriptures constantly advocate for humility instead, because we have just a tiny sliver, not only of our knowledge, but of experience itself, based on what we could have experienced in our average 75 years here upon the earth. We just can't possibly know a lot. So we have to keep an open mind, is what I'm advocating. And it is stories like this in this wonderful book by Clark, Space Age Indians, that help us tie in not only with the old stuff, the ancient stories, but with our own selves, understanding that the tribal aspect thinking of our world can't possibly be the best thing for us, because we are all of the human race. All of us are here together. And so going to war, unless it's absolutely necessary, really should be the last resort, not the first. Living peacefully is vastly to be preferred. In a high energy, high peaceful state, just like these blue men beings, these star people want. And I would suggest that makes a very, very beautiful Easter message as well, because based on what I've read about Jesus, that is his point of view also. We would love to be resurrected into eternal life, not in order to go to war, but to live peacefully. And that's worth celebrating. That's why we celebrate Easter. So happy Easter, everybody. I will catch up to you as soon as I can. More coming down the pipeline. Have a fabulous Easter.